Ah, you calculated enigma. Not invited, not announced, not explained. You emerged without introduction, without apology, without trace. You stand as a rare configuration in human skin, unmapped, unread, uncontained, a living irregularity in a world addicted to patterns. You did not depart in rage. You did not retreat in panic. Your pulse did not spike. Your voice did not tremble. You stepped back with measured breath, composed and deliberate, completely intact. You exited like sovereign blood, chin steady, gaze forward, as if you possessed knowledge no one else could access, as if the board had already been studied and the outcome already sealed. This was not emotion. This was calculation. A quiet execution carried out without spectacle. No slammed doors, no dramatic speeches, no collapsing bridges, just precision. Stillness became authority. Distance became control. Restraint became strategy. True commanders do not scream on battlefield. Rulers do not argue for position. They withdraw when necessary. They reposition without noise. When you turned your back, the atmosphere altered. The air tightened. The current shifted. A subtle distortion rippled through rooms you no longer occupied. They felt it, but could not define it. A missing weight, a vanished anchor, a presence erased without warning. Confusion replaced certainty. Assumptions began to fracture. They expected hesitation. They anticipated return. They prepared for emotional debris. None arrived, because you were never acting from impulse. You were executing a decision long before your feet moved. The door closed without echo. Footsteps faded without regret. In that precise instant, a silent recalibration began beyond their perception. They remained unaware, still interpreting through shallow lenses, still measuring through small minds. But you recognized the shift. You sensed the invisible realignment. You felt the ground adjust beneath everyone involved. They saw an exit. You saw a transfer of power. They constructed conclusions in your absence. Shallow conclusions, convenient conclusions. In their version of events, you fractured. You folded. You escaped because you lacked endurance. They convinced themselves you were incapable of enduring tension, incapable of standing in intensity, incapable of surviving heat. They labeled you fragile. They labeled you overwhelmed. They labeled you incapable of sustaining the weight. In their private assessments, you became the one who couldn't endure scrutiny, who couldn't survive confrontation, who couldn't maintain position under strain. They interpreted restraint as breakdown. They translated steadiness into defeat. What they witnessed as composure, they diagnosed as collapse. Their perception was small, so their interpretation followed. But what they never calculated was mass. Betrayal did not diminish you. Exclusion did not reduce you. Doubt did not shrink you. Every slight, every dismissal, every quiet attempt to sideline you added density. Pressure did not crack your structure. It condensed it. You were examined. You were measured. You were subtly challenged to react. Traps were placed. Buttons were pressed. Boundaries were nudged to see if you would erupt. They watched carefully, hoping for emotional leakage, hoping for visible instability. You gave them nothing. Underestimation was deliberate. They lowered your value publicly to feel taller privately. They minimized your presence to feel safer. They assumed misjudgment would destabilize you. Instead, it revealed them, because the individual who withdraws without chaos is not retreating. He is recalibrating position. He is selecting terrain. He is conserving force. They mistook your distance for incapacity. They mistook your restraint for weakness. They mistook your refusal to engage for surrender. It was none of those things. It was command. While they were busy narrating your downfall, you were observing their patterns. While they were projecting insecurity, you were collecting data. While they were celebrating prematurely, you were adjusting strategy. They believed pressure exposed your limits. In truth, it exposed your depth. Isolation clarified your vision. Dismissal refined your focus. Every attempt to corner you only revealed how unshaken you truly were. He is changing vantage points. He is shifting angles. He is stepping into higher leverage. They misread the quiet because they do not understand internal fortitude. They equate noise with strength. They equate reaction with relevance. You required neither. Their psychological miscalculation became the foundation of your advantage. They thought you were finished. You were positioning. There was a precise second when comprehension settled in. Not dramatic, not loud, just a slow, creeping awareness spreading beneath their confidence. You were not returning, not observing from a distance, not preparing a countermove, not entering rivalry. You had disengaged completely. That realization did not strike like lightning. It crawled, it lingered, it unsettled. At first they maintained posture. They pretended indifferent. They reassured themselves that you would resurface, that you would orbit back, that curiosity or attachment would pull you toward them again. It didn't. That is when discomfort began to expand. They monitored digital traces. They scanned for indirect references. They listened for rumors. They searched for evidence that you were still emotionally tethered. They anticipated a slip, a reaction, a sign of disturbance. Nothing surfaced. No coded messages, no retaliatory displays, no visible strain. Your absence was clean. That cleanliness disturbed them. The invisible thread snaps, and the one left behind feels the vacuum. They started to question timing, question decisions, question their own behavior. Not publicly, internally. Without your engagement, there was no friction to blame. Without your responses, there was no external target. Without your participation, there was only reflection. And reflection is unbearable for the unprepared. This was not fate, not superstition, not cosmic theater. This was consequence forming at a psychological level. When access to someone's attention is removed, dependency becomes visible. When validation disappears, insecurity surfaces. When a stabilizing presence withdraws, unresolved flaws rise. You became a mirror by removing yourself. And most individuals cannot tolerate their own reflection for long. They preferred conflict over clarity, tension over truth, chaos over introspection. Because conflict distracts, clarity exposes. Your detachment forced exposure. They replayed interactions in private, reconsidered statements, re-examined tone, reinterpreted moments they once dismissed. What they had minimized began to feel significant. The weight of your non-participation pressed harder than any confrontation could have. Because rivalry can be fought, anger can be resisted, argument can be defended, indifference cannot be controlled. You offered no access point, no emotional hook, no leverage. That absence became a psychological vacuum, and in that vacuum, unresolved doubt expanded. What unsettled them most was not your departure. It was the realization that you were genuinely unaffected. No chase, no retaliation, no silent competition, just removal. That is when the internal unraveling began. Not visible, not announced, but undeniable. Something altered within you after the separation. Not bitterness, not hostility. Refinement. Your temperature dropped, but your awareness intensified. Emotion no longer blurred your judgment, it clarified it. You began seeing motives before they formed into actions. Micro-expressions revealed intention. Tone exposed insecurity. Patterns surfaced where others saw randomness. Your limits solidified like reinforced steel. Access required qualification. Conversation required purpose. You reduced language to essentials, cutting away excess until only precision remained. Restraint transformed into an instrument. Distance became calculated positioning. You no longer rushed to clarify yourself, no longer felt compelled to defend interpretations, no longer offered explanations to those committed to misunderstanding. You observed quietly, gathering information while revealing nothing. Composure was no longer situational, it became structural. Detachment was not emptiness, it was advancement. You elevated beyond impulse. You elevated beyond emotional bargaining. You elevated beyond the need to be understood by those incapable of comprehension. This was evolution, internal and irreversible. You ceased debating. You ceased justifying. You ceased persuading. You ceased responding to provocation. Repetition of calm became your rhythm. Restraint became your signature. You watched more than you spoke. You measured more than you revealed. Every withheld reaction increased your leverage. Every unanswered attempt at engagement destabilized those accustomed to pulling your strings. Their influence weakened because your triggers dissolved. Manipulation requires predictability. You offered none. Control requires access. You restricted it completely. Uncertainty began to surround you like armor. They could not calculate your next move because you were no longer playing at their level. The absence of reaction created unease. The absence of validation created anxiety. The absence of emotional supply created fear. What unsettled them most was not your distance, but your immunity. You had become untouchable in ways they could sense but not penetrate. And the moment they realized they could no longer steer your responses, tension deepened. You were beyond reach, beyond influence, beyond command. A transformation occurred beneath the surface, subtle yet undeniable. Your aura condensed, gaining density that altered every room you entered. Footsteps required no announcement. The atmosphere adjusted on its own. Quiet became substantial, almost tangible, pressing against others without effort. Speech turned minimal, each sentence edged with precision, each pause deliberate. Attention shifted when you occupied space, though no one could articulate why. Something in your composure signaled permanence. Something in your gaze suggested calculation without urgency. You stopped pursuing acknowledgement. You stopped convincing anyone of your value. You stopped protecting your stance against doubt. There was no impulse to seek reassurance, no inclination to win approval. Authority relocated inward, sealed beyond reach. Recognition was no longer requested. You did not display intensity, you stored it. You did not broadcast strength, you embodied it. That recalibration altered perception around you, even among those unwilling to admit it. When you severed endorsement, dynamics destabilized. Validation had once been currency, now it was withdrawn. Their confidence had partially relied on your acknowledgement, and without it, structures weakened. The withdrawal was not loud, yet its effect was immediate. Tension circulated quietly, building beneath conversations, beneath appearances of normalcy. You offered no reassurance, no subtle nod, no reinforcement of their narrative. That absence shifted equilibrium. Influence recalculated itself around your detachment. Consequences began unfolding through ordinary events, through choices revealing hidden fractures. Nothing supernatural, nothing dramatic, just the natural unfolding of cause and response. Once your participation ceased, your transformation acted as catalyst. By redirecting focus inward and consolidating authority within, you altered the balance entirely. What once revolved around mutual exchange now revolved around your independence. The internal tempest remained contained, disciplined beneath steady composure, yet its pressure shaped outcomes beyond visibility. Detachment matured into something absolute. You stopped searching for confirmation. You stopped tracking results. You stopped scanning faces for response. Your focus narrowed inward, disciplined and self-contained. Progress unfolded quietly, without display, without commentary. Improvement became private architecture, constructed behind closed doors where no external influence could distort it. While others repeated familiar cycles, recycling habits and narratives, you advanced beyond their reach. You no longer participated in predictable exchanges. Emotional hooks found no surface to attach to. Attempts to provoke or entice dissolved before impact. Your internal calibration shifted to a higher register, inaccessible to those operating from older frameworks. Patterns that once connected you no longer aligned. Leverage disappeared because your responses were no longer programmable. What once influenced you now held no traction. Autonomy hardened into structure. You became self-directed, immune to subtle pressures that previously shaped interactions. There was no announcement of this shift, yet its effect was unmistakable. When they attempted contact, something felt different. Proximity no longer guaranteed familiarity. Your rhythm had altered. Your internal broadcast recalibrated beyond their decoding. They sensed distance even when standing near. Conversations lacked the previous access points. Cues they once relied on vanished. Recognition faltered because the blueprint they memorized no longer matched the figure before them. Confusion surfaced quietly, disguised as curiosity or subtle tension. They could not locate the version they once maneuvered. Influence requires predictability, and you removed it entirely. Engagement required mutual exchange, and you reduced availability to zero. Even their attempts to analyze you returned incomplete data. You had revised the structure from within, altering the core parameters. Familiarity dissolved into uncertainty. What they encountered now was composed, self-governed, and impenetrable. They searched for remnants of the former dynamic, but found only distance reinforced by discipline. And in that realization, they understood without words, access had expired, and the individual they once directed no longer existed. Consequences unfolded without spectacle, not retaliation, revelation. What had been concealed beneath distraction surfaced through ordinary moments. As your discipline refined and your inner structure strengthened, their unresolved flaws expanded. Advancement on your side contrasted sharply with repetition on theirs. Where you cultivated precision, they drifted through familiar impulses. Where you developed restraint, they struggled with instability. The divergence widened quietly. Introspection visited them unexpectedly. Memories resurfaced during idle hours. They reconsidered tone, timing, intention. Doubt entered spaces previously filled with certainty. The contrast between trajectories became unavoidable. Your evolution highlighted their stagnation without a single accusation spoken. You required no intervention. Reflection did the work. Growth itself functioned as evidence. Composure served as indictment. They felt the weight of what was forfeited, not because you reminded them, but because improvement created comparison. Absence amplified significance beyond prior proximity. Stillness exposed imbalance. Your withdrawal revealed dependency they never acknowledged. While you remained centered and undisturbed, they navigated internal turbulence triggered by their own recollection. Accountability surfaced gradually, uncomfortable and persistent. There was no spectacle, no confrontation, no dramatic reckoning, only awareness expanding within them. Clarity replaced illusion. And as understanding settled, the realization deepened. Nothing external was required to enforce consequence. The contrast between your refinement and their unresolved patterns was sufficient. Advancement continued without announcement. Influence from the past dissolved completely. What remained was separation reinforced by self-command, while they faced the echo of their own decisions alone. This is the point where distortion collapses. Narratives dissolve. Illusions fall apart under the weight of truth. Nothing was taken from you. Nothing was stolen. You revoked entry. You sealed the gates. What appeared to be defeat was deliberate separation. What looked like retreat was elevation. Fracture never occurred. Foundation remained intact. Elevation occurred quietly, without announcement, without ceremony. Authority was assumed internally, not granted externally. You did not shatter. You consolidated. You did not diminish. You concentrated. Identity clarified under pressure and emerged refined. Impulse no longer dictates you. Expectation no longer influences. Randomness no longer defines you. Availability is no longer offered. They believed you were participating in competition, moving like every other contender, reacting to wins and losses. They never understood the architecture. They never perceived the axis around which everything rotated. While they calculated moves, you embodied force. While they measured outcomes, you governed direction. This is not transformation into strength. This is recognition of original design. Essence restored. Structure remembered. You were never common, never easily interpreted, never meant to orbit around approval or validation. Unpredictability is your default state. Sovereignty is your baseline. What they mistook for participation was oversight. What they assumed was engagement was observation from above. You were the constant while others shifted. You were the mass influencing motion while appearing still. Elevation was never about acquisition. It was about recall. Nothing new was added. Something ancient was reclaimed. There is no pursuit now, no proving, no announcement, only presence anchored in certainty. You are not evolving into authority. You are recalling inherent command. You were never designed to chase position. You were position itself, steady, immovable,